How you doing, Ben? Uh, First question is, I know there's no magical formula, bullet, but what advice will you give to a new speechwriter who has just been assigned to the task of writing the speech for the political candidate?
That's a great question. I think the first thing to keep in mind and the most critical thing to keep in mind is that new speechwriters sometimes get distracted by the writing. And the writing is an important component, but you have to focus first on the message and the structure of the speech. So in the case of a political candidate, you need to first really distill the message with the candidate, with the circle of advisors, and then you have to find the right structure for the speech to communicate that particular message. And so it's really a matter more of figuring out the architecture of the speech as opposed to the beautiful words, which is what a young writer, a first-time speechwriter wants to do, to figure out those beautiful words, those beautiful turns of phrase. But they're important, but they don't necessarily articulate a message. And that's the most critical factor, figuring out how to articulate a specific message. And you do that through research, through a process of investigation that leads you to a certain structure of the speech. And then you can find nice words and nice turns of phrase. But that's the end. That's that's the icing on the cake. You need the cake first.
Okay, excellent, excellent. So, delivering speech versus informing your audience. Paint us a picture on the team, resources, etc. that go into a speech at the White House.
Well, at the White House, everything's amplified. It's the biggest stage. There are the most number of people involved in the process. But what's true in the White House is also true outside of the White House for a member of Congress, for a member of the legislature in a state, for a mayor, really for any candidate of any kind or any public official of any kind. But there's a big team that comes together to build these speeches because the speeches typically are trying to convince the public that a certain policy is the right way to go, convince the public that they should elect a candidate. And so these things involve policy discussions and policy conversations. So at the White House, the National Security Council is involved. The policy, if it's a domestic issue, the policy advisors on that particular domestic issue gets pulled into the picture. When you're president, you have an administration. You have ministers, secretaries, we call them in the U.S., but the people who run the department, the federal agencies for education, for defense, for the State Department. So depending on what the speech is on, those teams from those agencies will get pulled into the process a little bit as well. So there's a big circle of advisors, and that's why the speechwriter is so critical, because when you think about it, everything goes through that speechwriter. Everything, all of the information comes, I described it as a funnel. And the speechwriter is at the bottom of the funnel. And they're the point at which all of these ideas and advice and the discussion really comes together. And that's their job, to help broker that process. And it's a difficult one, especially in the White House, but also outside of it.
Okay. Ben, how important is an emotional speak? What's the role for that, for emotional speak?
It's an important part of the speechwriting process, and an important thing for the speaker and the speechwriter to keep in mind. You have to make an emotional connection with your audience, and you can use emotion in very powerful ways to make a point, to try to convince an audience to take a particular action, because that's what the speech is all about. It's a call to action. You want your audience to do something, to remember something, to think or to feel a certain way at the end of the speech. And you can do that most successfully by calling on an emotional response, or trying to trigger an emotional response, or using emotional content. And so this is often done in speechwriting by illustrating a scenario through the perspective of the eyes of one person. So if you can bring a big issue down to just one person and describe how that issue affects that one person's life. And you can use a real person, you can use an imaginary person, the speaker can use him or herself, or that person could be someone in the audience. Those are all very effective ways of kind of deploying this tactic, but it's really about illustrating the impact on a person's life, and that's how you get an emotional response, whether the impact is positive or whether the impact is negative, depending on what you're trying to do in the speech. If you're trying to oppose a policy or a candidate, or if you're trying to get people to buy into a policy or a candidate. So the emotion can be positive or negative, but it really works well if you just bring it down to one person.
Okay.
That's an important thing to do.
Okay, excellent. So that's all. We thank you
Great.
for being here with the
Thank you.
ADCP, and hope to see you soon.
Likewise, I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.